He drugged my infant son with Benadryl, not to help him sleep, but to steal his hair for a secret DNA test he thought I'd never find. He just found out how wrong he was. The world, for a brief moment, had shrunk to the size of the living room rug. It was just me, my 6-month-old son, Noah, and the quiet, rhythmic squeak of the rubber giraffe he was currently trying to fit entirely into his mouth. His small hand, a perfect, miniature version of my own, was wrapped around my thumb. I watched the focused little frown on his face, the sheer determination of it, and a wave of something warm and fierce washed over me. It was a feeling I was still getting used to, this overwhelming, almost painful love. My wife, Clara, leaned against the doorframe, a soft smile on her face. "You're a natural," she said, her voice a low murmur that cut through the silence. I looked up at her, then back down at Noah. "I'm trying to be," I said, and I meant it. My own father had been a distant figure, a man more comfortable with balanced sheets than bedtime stories. His love was something you assumed was there, like the foundation of a house, but you never actually saw the concrete being poured. I had sworn to myself, in the quiet, terrified hours after Noah was born, that I would be different. I would be present. I would be the dad who knew how to soothe a cry, who changed the diapers without being asked, who would build the forts and fix the scraped knees. The doorbell chimed, a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the peace. Clara's smile tightened just a fraction. "They're here." They were Arthur and Eleanor, my in-laws. Eleanor was sweet, if a bit flustered, always trying to smooth over the rough edges of her husband. Arthur, well, Arthur was the reason for those rough edges. He was a man who had built a successful construction empire and saw the world in terms of concrete, steel, and profit margins. My own small, fledgling landscape architecture business was, in his eyes, something akin to a child's hobby. As soon as they stepped inside, Arthur's gaze swept the room, cataloging everything. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem friendly, but felt more like an assessment of structural integrity. "Leo, still playing house, I see." I forced a smile, shifting Noah in my arms. "He's a full-time job," Arthur grunted, his eyes landing on the changing mat I'd left on the floor. Back in my day, I was out on a job site at his age, not at home, changing diapers. A man's got to have ambition. The barb landed exactly where he intended, a sharp jab at my financial instability and my choice to be a hands-on father. I could feel the familiar heat rise in my chest, the defensive words bubbling up. But I swallowed them for Clara's sake. She shot me a quick, apologetic look as she led her mother into the kitchen. Arthur peered down at Noah, who had started to fuss at the unfamiliar, booming voice. "So," Arthur said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp, analytical. "Who do you think he looks like?" Before I could answer, he plowed on. "He's got Clara's eyes, that's for sure. And that nose, definitely from her side of the family. Can't see much of you in him at all." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Genetics are a funny thing, eh?" I held my son a little tighter. It was the kind of comment Arthur specialized in, a seemingly innocent observation laced with something else, something sharp and unsettling. It was a seed of doubt, planted with a careless smile, and I had a cold, sinking feeling that he was just getting started. The call came 2 weeks later. It was the break I'd been desperately working for, a potential contract to design the grounds for a new boutique hotel. The only catch was that the client wanted an in-person meeting. In 2 days. It was a 3-hour drive, meaning I'd have to stay overnight. When I told Clara, she was ecstatic for me, but her face fell slightly. "What about Noah? I'll leave first thing in the morning and be back by lunchtime the next day," I promised. "It's just one night." The moment Clara mentioned it to her parents on their nightly phone call, Arthur's voice boomed through the receiver, loud enough for me to hear from across the room. "He's going away? Alone? Where exactly is this meeting?" Clara patiently relayed the details, her voice tight with forced calm. "It's a huge opportunity for him, Dad." The day of my trip, my stomach was a knot of anxiety and excitement. As I packed my overnight bag, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Drive safe. The roads can be treacherous." I stared at it, confused, until Clara peered over my shoulder. "Oh, that's Dad's new number. He must have gotten it from me." The unsolicited concern felt less like care and more like surveillance. The meeting was a success. I was buzzing with energy on the drive home, my mind racing with design concepts, water features, native grasses, a stone meditation garden. I felt, for the first time in months, like a professional provider. I walked through our front door feeling 10 feet tall, ready to sweep Clara into my arms and tell her the good news. But the scene that greeted me brought me crashing back to earth. Arthur was there, sitting in my armchair, holding my son. "Arthur," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "What are you doing here?" "Eleanor's not feeling well, so I told Clara I'd come over and lend a hand," he said, not taking his eyes off Noah. "You look tired. Long night." "It was a good trip," I said, setting my bag down. "The meeting went great." Good, he said, his tone dismissive. He bounced Noah on his knee. "This little guy missed his dad, though he didn't seem to notice you were gone, to be honest. Kept him busy." He looked at me, a strange glint in his eye. "It must be nice, getting a break from all this. A night away from the responsibilities." Every word was a carefully aimed dart. He was framing my attempt to build a future for us as a dereliction of duty. He was painting me as the absent father he always seemed to want me to be. Clara came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Leo, how'd it go?" She saw my face, and her smile faltered. Later that night, after Arthur had finally left, I tried to explain it to her. "It's the way he talks, Clara. It's like he's always implying something." "Oh, Leo," she sighed, stroking my arm. "You're just stressed from the trip. He's from a different generation. His idea of helping is different. He's just trying to be a good grandfather." I wanted to believe her. I desperately wanted to believe that I was the one who was wrong, that I was just a paranoid new dad, overtired and oversensitive. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft breathing of my son in his crib, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt like I was a specimen under a microscope, and Arthur was the one holding the lens. A week later, the Trojan horse arrived. It came in the form of a generous offer from Arthur during one of his visits. He'd been watching Clara, who was clearly exhausted, trying to juggle a fussy baby and a freelance graphic design project. "Sweetheart," Arthur said, his voice dripping with paternal concern. "You need a break. This is too much for one person." He turned to me. "Leo's busy trying to get his business off the ground. How about this? I'll come over every Wednesday afternoon, just for a few hours. Let you get some work done, maybe take a nap. What do you say?" Clara's face lit up with a relief so profound it was painful to see. "Dad, would you really? That would be amazing." My own gut screamed, "No. It's a trick. Don't let him in." But how could I say that? How could I deny my exhausted wife a few hours of peace based on nothing more than a bad feeling? Voicing my suspicions would make me sound like a monster, a selfish husband keeping his wife from much-needed help. "That's really generous of you, Arthur," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. And so, the Wednesday visitations began. The first time, I hovered, making excuses to stay home. Arthur was perfectly charming, playing with Noah, telling Clara to go rest. The second Wednesday, I had a client meeting I couldn't miss. I left with a knot of dread in my stomach. When I came home, Clara was radiant. "It was wonderful," she gushed. "I got 3 hours of uninterrupted work done. Your dad was great with him." But I noticed Noah seemed off. He was sluggish, his eyes a little glassy, and he fell asleep long before his usual bedtime. When I mentioned it, Clara waved it away. "He's probably just tired out from playing with Grandpa all day." The following Wednesday, the same thing happened. I came home to a happy wife and a strangely lethargic baby. This time, I also noticed something else. Noah's small hairbrush, which we always kept on the changing table in his nursery, was sitting on the end table in the living room. "That's weird," I said, picking it up. "What is?" Clara asked. "Noah's brush. What's it doing out here?" "Oh, Dad was probably just playing with his hair. You know how he fusses over it." It was plausible. It was all so plausible. Each incident, on its own, was nothing. A tired baby, a misplaced brush. But they were starting to add up, like small, dissonant notes in a song that was becoming increasingly unsettling. The fourth Wednesday was when I found the first real piece of evidence. I came home early. As I walked in, I saw Arthur standing by the diaper pail, and he seemed startled when he saw me, quickly dropping something inside. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just fine," he said, his voice a little too loud. "Just cleaning up a bit." Later that evening, after he'd left, a sick curiosity got the better of me. I opened the diaper pail. On top of the used diapers was a small Ziploc bag. Inside it were several small, dark strands of hair. Noah's hair. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Why would he be collecting my son's hair? The question hung in the air, sinister and terrifying. I quickly closed the lid, my mind racing. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A strange, sentimental keepsake, maybe? But the secrecy, the startled look on his face, it didn't feel sentimental. It felt clinical. It felt like theft. I didn't tell Clara. I couldn't. How could I explain finding a bag of our son's hair in the trash without sounding completely insane? For now, this was a fear I had to carry alone. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd come down with a nasty head cold, the kind that makes your bones ache and your head feel like it's stuffed with cotton. I had to cancel a site visit and was shuffling around the house in a fog of misery when the phone rang. It was Arthur. "Clara told me you're not feeling well," he said. "About a free afternoon. Why don't I come over and take the little guy off your hands so you can get some real rest?" "No, that's okay. Arthur, we're fine," I started to say, but he cut me off. "Nonsense. A sick man can't look after a baby properly. I'll be there in 20. And he hung up. When he arrived, I was too drained to argue. I gave him a quick rundown of Noah's feeding schedule and retreated to the couch, surrendering to the pounding in my head. "I'll just be here if you need anything," I mumbled, pulling a blanket over myself. I must have fallen into a deep, feverish sleep. When I woke up, the living room was bathed in the orange glow of the late afternoon sun. My head felt clearer, but the house was eerily quiet. I sat up, a sense of unease prickling my skin. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 5. I'd been asleep for nearly 3 hours. I pushed myself off the couch and walked toward the nursery. That's when I heard it, a tiny, whimpering cry. I quickened my pace. I found Arthur in the nursery, hastily trying to snap up the front of Noah's onesie. He looked up, startled, a flash of something, guilt, in his eyes before it was replaced by a mask of nonchalance. "Hey, Sleeping Beauty," he said, his voice overly cheerful. "Look who's awake." Noah reached for me, his face blotchy and his movements sluggish. He wasn't just fussy, he seemed dazed. And then I saw it. He was wearing a plain, stark white onesie. A onesie I had never seen before in my life. This morning, I had dressed him in my favorite outfit for him, a soft, sky blue sleeper with little smiling clouds on it. "Where's his blue sleeper?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Oh, that," Arthur said, waving a dismissive hand. He had a massive spit-up, a real disaster. I had to change him. I found this one in the back of his drawer. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. Clara and I had organized those drawers just last weekend. There was no secret stash of white onesies. And Noah rarely spit up anymore, certainly not enough to warrant a full change. "Where's the blue one, then?" I pressed, taking Noah from his arms. My son felt limp, his head lolling against my shoulder. "I need to wash it." "Already took care of it," Arthur said quickly, already moving toward the door. "Tossed it in a bag to take home. Didn't want a dirty outfit stinking up the place. I'll bring it back clean next time." He was out the door before I could say another word. I stood in the quiet nursery, holding my strangely groggy son. The blue sleeper was gone. It had vanished, along with any semblance of plausible deniability. This wasn't about a misplaced brush or a sentimental lock of hair anymore. This was calculated. He had come here with a plan, waited for me to be unconscious, and then he had done something. I looked at the unfamiliar white onesie on my son, and I felt a terror so cold and sharp it stole my breath. It felt like a uniform, a piece of evidence from a crime I was only just beginning to understand. For 2 days, I lived in a silent, paranoid hell. I replayed the white onesie incident over and over in my mind. The lie was so blatant, so confident. It was the lie of a man who believed he was smarter than you, who believed he would never be caught. Every time I looked at Noah, my stomach twisted. What had he done? I knew I couldn't confront him without proof. He would just gaslight me, twist my words, and make me out to be the crazy one to Clara. I needed something concrete, something undeniable, and I had a sickening suspicion about where I might find it. Arthur's home office. He was obsessively organized with his finances and important documents, but I remembered something from a visit months ago. I'd been looking for a pen and had accidentally tried a drawer in his big oak desk. It was locked. Private business, he'd said with a tight smile. But I also remembered that he often left the key in the lock of a small, secondary filing cabinet in the corner. He was arrogant. He probably never imagined anyone would have the guts to go through his things. The opportunity came that Saturday. Clara mentioned her parents were driving out to the coast for the day to visit an old friend. The house would be empty. My heart hammered at the thought of what I was about to do. It was a massive violation of trust. But Arthur had already burned that bridge. He had violated the sanctity of my home and my family. This was not about snooping. This was about protecting my son. I told Clara I was going to the nursery to pick up some specialty fertilizer. It was a plausible lie, and she didn't question it. I drove to my in-laws' house, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I let myself in with the spare key from under the ceramic frog by the door, the familiar hiding spot feeling sinister today. The house was silent and still, smelling faintly of Eleanor's potpourri and old paper. I went straight to the office. The room was imposing, just like its owner, with dark wood and leather-bound books. I ignored the main desk and went to the small metal filing cabinet in the corner. My breath hitched. The small silver key was still in the lock. My fingers trembled as I turned it. The drawer slid open with a quiet, metallic groan. It was filled with old tax returns, property deeds, and car titles. I started digging, moving aside file after file. My heart sank. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just a paranoid fool making a terrible mistake. And then I saw it. At the very bottom, tucked beneath a file from 1998, was a plain manila envelope. It had no official markings. Just one word, written in Arthur's sharp, angry handwriting. Noah. My blood ran cold. I lifted the envelope. It was thin, holding only a few sheets of paper. With shaking hands, I pulled them out. The letterhead was from a lab I'd never heard of, a place in another state. It was a DNA paternity test report. I scanned the document, my eyes jumping from section to section. Alleged father, Leo Vance. Child, Noah Vance. And then the final, soul-crushing line of text. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I sank into Arthur's leather chair, the papers rattling in my hand. He knew. The report was dated 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. He had known for over a month that his suspicions were baseless, that his vile, secret investigation had proven him wrong. And yet, he had continued. The comments, the weird behavior, the white onesie, all of it had happened after he already had this report in his hands. The relief of being vindicated lasted only a second, immediately consumed by a wave of pure, white-hot rage. This wasn't about a grandfather's concern anymore. This was about power. It was a game to him. He hadn't been looking for the truth. He had been looking for a weapon to use against me. And when he didn't find one, he just kept pretending he had. I took out my phone and photographed every page of the report, my hand steady now, fueled by a cold, hard fury. He thought he was untouchable. He was about to find out how wrong he was. I drove home in a state of chilling clarity. The anger wasn't a hot, messy emotion anymore. It was a block of ice in my chest. I had the proof. The game was over. Clara was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She looked up and smiled when I came in, but her smile faded as she saw my face. Leo, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I said, my voice low and steady. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos. You need to see this. I handed her the phone without another word. I watched her face as she scrolled through the images. I saw the initial confusion, the flicker of recognition at her father's address on the envelope, and then the dawning horror as she realized what she was looking at. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a small, choked sound escaped her lips. She sank onto a kitchen chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, he wouldn't. He couldn't." "He did, Clara," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "It's dated 6 weeks ago. He's known all this time." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning sense of betrayal that mirrored my own. The man who had raised her, the father she loved and feared and defended, had done this. He had secretly declared war on her husband, on their marriage. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the seconds of our old life as it crumbled away. "We have to talk to him," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I have to hear him say it." 2 hours later, we were sitting in Arthur and Eleanor's living room. We had called and said it was an emergency. Arthur sat opposite us, a look of impatient concern on his face. Eleanor wrung her hands, sensing the tension. Clara couldn't speak, so I did. "We know, Arthur," I said. "We know about the test." Eleanor gasped. Arthur's face, for a split second, went blank with shock. Then, the mask of indignation slammed down. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," Clara said, finding her voice. It was sharp, brittle. "Don't you dare lie to me." She held up my phone, the image of the report glowing in the dim light. "I saw it, Dad. We saw it." Arthur stared at the phone, then at our faces. The bluster drained out of him, replaced by a sullen defensiveness. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He didn't look guilty. He looked defiant. "All right," he said, his voice hard. "So you should be thanking me." I stared at him, incredulous. "Thanking you? For what?" "For going behind our backs and treating my son like a piece of evidence in some sick investigation." "I did it for her," he snarled, pointing a thick finger at Clara. "To protect her. To protect this family. You think I'm going to stand by and watch my daughter potentially raise another man's child? Not on my watch." He puffed out his chest. "A real man protects his bloodline." I did what any good father would do. The arrogance was breathtaking. There was no remorse, no apology. Only a deep, unshakable conviction that he was, and always would be, right. The crack in our family's foundation had just split wide open, revealing a dark, toxic chasm beneath. And I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. The drive home was a blur of silent fury. When we walked back into our own home, our sanctuary that now felt violated, Clara finally broke. She collapsed onto the couch and sobbed, not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of the father she thought she knew. I held her, feeling her whole body shake, and my anger toward Arthur hardened into something colder and more resolute. The next day, Clara, seeking an ally, called her brother, David. I could only hear her side of the conversation, a series of pained, halting sentences explaining what their father had done. I expected to hear her being met with outrage, with shock. Instead, there was a long pause. When Clara spoke again, her voice was small, wounded. What do you mean, you understand?" She listened for another minute, her face growing pale. She hung up the phone without saying goodbye and stared at the wall. "What did he say?" I asked, dread coiling in my stomach. She turned to look at me, her eyes swimming with a fresh wave of tears. He said he gets why Dad did it." Her voice cracked. "He said he was worried too. That Noah doesn't look that much like you. That you've been distracted. He said he and Dad had talked about it a few months ago." The floor dropped out from under me. It wasn't just Arthur. It was a conspiracy. A quiet, family-wide suspicion campaign waged against me in whispers and worried phone calls. David, who I'd always thought was a friendly, if distant, brother-in-law, had been judging me, doubting me, right alongside his father. I felt a profound sense of isolation, like I was an outsider who had never truly been accepted, just tolerated. The revelation broke something in Clara. The unified front we had presented in her parents' living room began to crumble under the weight of her family's collective doubt. That night, she sat on the edge of our bed, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Maybe we are overreacting," she said softly. I stared at her. "Overreacting? Clara, he took a secret DNA test on our son." I know it was wrong," she said, her voice rising with a desperate, pleading tone. But Leo, if David felt that way too, if they were all just worried, maybe Dad's intentions were good. Maybe he just handled it in the worst possible way. Good intentions don't give him the right to violate our family like that. But what now? She cried, standing up and pacing the room. Do we just blow up the entire family over this? He's my father. David's my brother. Noah's grandfather and uncle. Maybe there's a way to fix this. Maybe we could try counseling or... Counseling? I cut her off, my voice sharp with disbelief. He doesn't think he did anything wrong. What are we going to counsel him on? His God complex. Leo, this is my family, she shot back, her own anger flaring. We can't just throw a grenade into it and walk away. He threw the grenade, Clara, the day he decided I wasn't good enough to be the father of my own child. The fight was ugly, fueled by our pain and fear. She accused me of being unforgiving, of wanting to punish her father. I accused her of choosing her toxic family over her husband and son. We went to sleep in stony silence, a chasm yards wide between us in the bed. I lay there in the darkness, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I hadn't just uncovered a secret. I had uncovered the fact that to my wife's family, I would always be the prime suspect. And now, I wasn't even sure if my wife was on my side. The next few days were a tense ceasefire. We moved around each other with a fragile, painful courtesy. The elephant in the room wasn't just the DNA test anymore. It was Clara's wavering loyalty. She was being bombarded with calls from her mother, pleading for her to be the bigger person and think of the family. The pressure was grinding her down, and in turn, grinding me down. I realized I was losing her. She was retreating into the familiar pattern of her upbringing, smoothing things over, avoiding conflict, accepting the unacceptable for the sake of a hollow peace. I knew, with a desperate certainty, that there was only one way to make her see the truth, to make her understand the true depth of her father's violation. It wasn't enough to know what he did. We had to know how. Clara, I said one evening, my voice quiet but firm. I can't move on. I can't pretend this is okay. But there's one thing I need to know before I can even think about what's next. I took a breath. I need to know how he got the sample. Exactly. She looked terrified, but she saw the resolve in my eyes. She knew this was the only path forward. She nodded numbly. We called Arthur and told him we needed to talk one last time. He arrived with the air of a man who was expecting an apology. He sat in the same armchair he'd occupied so many times, a king on his throne, waiting for his subjects to bend the knee. I'm glad you've come to your senses, he began. We're not here to apologize, Arthur, I said, my voice dangerously calm. We have one question for you. How did you get Noah's DNA? He waved his hand dismissively. It's not important. The results are what matter. It is important to us, Clara said, her voice trembling but clear. How did you do it? Arthur sighed, a long, theatrical sound of a man burdened by the foolishness of others. Fine. If you must know, I did my research. Found a lab that accepts non-standard samples. Hair is the easiest to get without anyone noticing. He looked at us, as if expecting praise for his ingenuity. My blood ran cold as I remembered the misplaced brush, the Ziploc bag, and the diaper pail. So you were pulling his hair out? Clara whispered, horrified. Just a few strands at a time. He never felt a thing, Arthur said defensively. But it was difficult. He's a squirmy little thing. I leaned forward, my hands clenched in a fist on my knees. And the day I was sick, I said, my voice a low growl. The day you took his blue sleeper. What happened that day? Arthur's eyes darted away for a second. He was being fussy that day. It was hard to get a clean sample. He paused, and in that pause, the entire world tilted on its axis. He looked back at us, his expression one of frustration, not remorse. So I gave him a little something to calm him down, that's all. Clara stared at him, uncomprehending. A little something? What are you talking about? He let out an exasperated sigh. Benadryl, just a tiny bit of children's Benadryl to make him sleepy. I looked up the dosage online. It's perfectly harmless. I had to do it, or I'd never have gotten a clean sample. He was calm as a lamb after that. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Benadryl. I looked up the dosage online. He hadn't just violated our trust. He hadn't just stolen from our child. He had drugged him. He had performed a medical experiment on our infant son based on an internet search to facilitate his secret crime. I looked at Clara. The color had drained from her face. The daughter, the peacekeeper, the one who made excuses, vanished right before my eyes. Her expression went utterly blank, and then it hardened into something I had never seen before, a look of pure, primal fury. The mother had taken her place. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer her own. It was a shard of ice. "What did you just say you did to my son?" Arthur started to bluster, to defend himself, but she rose from the couch, a silent, menacing figure. "Get out," she said, her voice a low, terrifying whisper. "Get out of our house." He stared at her, stunned into silence by this new, formidable version of his daughter. "Now," she screamed, the word tearing from her throat, raw and full of a pain so deep it was terrifying. Arthur, for the first time in his life, looked afraid. He scrambled to his feet and practically fled from our home. The moment the door slammed shut behind him, Clara's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, her body racked with violent, silent sobs. The final foundation had been dynamited. There was no going back. The aftermath of Arthur's confession was a state of shocked, adrenaline-fueled action. The image of him feeding our son medication from a dropper, a dose he'd guesstimated from a Google search, was burned into my brain. What if Noah had an allergic reaction? What if the dosage was wrong? What if something had happened while I was asleep on the couch? The what-ifs were a swarm of angry hornets in my head. Clara, now operating with a chilling new resolve, was the first one to move. She picked up her phone, her hands still shaking, and called our pediatrician's after-hours line. She relayed the story in a flat, monotone voice. The response from the doctor on call was immediate and horrified. "That is extremely dangerous," the doctor said, her voice sharp with alarm. "Giving an unprescribed antihistamine to an infant is absolutely not recommended. You have no idea how their system will react. You need to watch him closely for any signs of respiratory distress or excessive lethargy. Frankly, what your father did could be considered child endangerment." The word child endangerment hung in the air between us, heavy and real. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was something far darker. "We have to call the police," I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "Not to press charges, necessarily, but we need a record. We need an official report of what he did." Clara nodded, her eyes hard as stone. "Yes, and more." She took a deep breath. "I want a restraining order, Leo. I don't want him anywhere near Noah. Ever again." The decision was instant and absolute. The man who had once been her father was now, in her eyes, a threat. The next morning, we sat in a police station, giving a statement to a tired but patient officer. Then, we went to a lawyer's office, the scent of old books and bitter coffee filling the air, and began the process of legally barring our son's grandfather from his life. We were drawing a line, not in the sand, but in concrete and steel, reinforced with the fierce, unwavering certainty that we were doing the only thing we could do. We were protecting our son. The legal documents felt cold and brutal in my hands, but they also felt like a shield. They were the tangible proof that our little family of 3 was now its own sovereign nation, and we had just closed the borders for good. The moment the legal process began, the storm broke. Our phones became instruments of torture, buzzing incessantly with calls and text from Eleanor and David. Eleanor's calls were tearful, hysterical pleas. "You're destroying this family, Clara. Your father made a mistake. He loves Noah. How can you do this to him? To us?" David's messages were laced with a cold fury. "You've lost your mind. He was trying to protect you, and this is how you repay him? By bringing cops into it? You're ungrateful, and you're letting that husband of yours poison you against your own blood." Each message was a new wound, a fresh wave of guilt they were trying to drown us in. But it didn't work. Something fundamental had shifted inside us. Their words, which once would have sent Clara into a spiral of doubt, now bounced off the armor of her maternal rage. She answered her mother's call once, her voice calm and final. "We are not destroying the family, Mom," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We are protecting ours. Arthur endangered our son. This conversation is over. Please don't call again. And she hung up. In the weeks that followed, a quiet settled over our home. It wasn't a happy quiet, not at first. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped, heavy with loss and the smell of smoke. We mourned the family we thought we had. We mourned the grandparents, and the Uncle Noah would now never know. There were nights Clara cried softly in her sleep, and I would just hold her, knowing there were no words that could fix this. But slowly, gradually, the quiet began to change. It became less about loss and more about peace. It was the peace of a locked door. The peace of knowing our son was safe. The peace of not having to brace for the next backhanded comment, the next violation. One evening, about a month later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sketching out a design for the hotel project I had landed. The work was demanding, but it was mine. In the living room, Clara was on the floor with Noah, building a wobbly tower of brightly colored blocks. I watched them, the warm lamplight pooling around them, creating a small, perfect circle of light in the darkness. Noah laughed, a pure, bubbling sound, as the tower toppled over. Clara laughed with him, scooping him into her arms and kissing his chubby cheek. In that moment, the weight I had been carrying for months seemed to lift. I looked at my wife and my son, my real family, my entire world. We had lost so much, but we had saved everything that truly mattered. I had learned a hard lesson about fatherhood, that sometimes being a protector doesn't mean fighting off monsters in the dark. Sometimes it means having the strength to recognize when a monster is someone you're supposed to love and having the courage to lock the door. It was a steep price to pay for peace. But looking at them, I knew without a doubt I would pay it again.